Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Dharma for Difficult Times. These are nightly sessions that are held by either myself or Pastor David, and through these sessions we're going to be sharing a little bit of Dharma with you that you can actually do at home, especially during this time when we're all stuck indoors. So if you're joining us for the first time, especially my sessions, I'm actually going to be talking about the Four Noble Truths. Now, the Four Noble Truths are actually the foundation of all Buddhist practice, and knowing this, knowing the Four Noble Truths, actually starts your practice and also bolsters your existing practice if you're already practicing Buddhism. So I've already done 2 sessions, and the first 2 sessions covered the first 2 of the Noble Truths, and today I'll be covering the 3rd Noble Truth. So before I begin talking about the 3rd Noble Truth, let me recap again what the 4 Noble Truths are. Now, when the Buddha attained enlightenment, the first teaching that he gave was the Four Noble Truths. So all subsequent teachings after that are actually based on this teaching. So basically, in essence, the Buddha taught 4 things. The first is that when we live, when we interact, just being part of existence is actually suffering. Hi Cindy, nice to see you here. Thanks for joining. Let's see who else is on. So, hi Mr. Lum, nice to see you here. Thanks for joining the 3rd session of the Four Noble Truths. So, as I was explaining, the Buddha taught 4 things. The first is that within samsara, within life, there is suffering. And actually, we need to understand that we are suffering in one way or another, whether it's mental, whether it's emotional, whether it's physical. And once you realize that, that is the first step to actually overcoming it. Because actually, with any problem that we go through in life, you need to know and understand that there is a problem first. Hi Nancy, nice to see you here. And once you know that you have a problem, then you can actually move past it. You can work on it and you can improve yourself or improve the situation to actually sort things out. So the Buddha actually taught the suffering aspect of the Four Noble Truths first, because what the Buddha was actually trying to do, he was actually trying to shock you. And the Buddha was trying to shock you in a sense to, shock you out of your way of thinking, or shock you into a new way of thinking, which the Buddha was trying to explain. The Buddha then explained that suffering itself is based on something. It has its causes. Hi Yinping. And this is the 2nd Noble Truth, that there is a cause to our problems, that there is a cause to our suffering. And in essence, this is something that I went over within the last session, which is that the basis of suffering is actually karma. Okay? Karma is this law of existence, you could say. And in essence, it basically means that if you do something good will happen to you. And if you do something bad will happen to you. There's a very small and a very quick definition of what karma is. Okay? Now, the study of karma is actually quite a very huge topic, because every single action that we take in life actually has a reaction, and we have to suffer from that or benefit from it. So this is why understanding that all suffering is caused by karma. Hi JP, thanks for joining us. And the causes of the suffering is karma, but karma itself is based on what can be boiled down to 3 different things. The first is ignorance, attachment, and hatred. Okay? So any action you take in life, whether it's a beneficial action or it's a negative action, is actually based on one of these three things. So if we're analyzing any situation in life, our life right now, you can actually, if you contemplate on it, you can actually bring it down to one of these three things. Okay? So that is the cause of suffering. But then after that, the Buddha taught that there is an end to suffering, and this is what I'm going to be talking about today. This end to suffering starts what people know as the positive side of the Four Noble Truths. And then following the third Noble Truth, you get on to the fourth, which is the actual way to get out of suffering completely. Okay? So throughout today's session, what I want to talk about is actually the cessation of suffering, or the third Noble Truth, which is that suffering actually ends, and what this actually means. I see quite a few people joining us, so hello Martin and Tazaan, thank you very much for joining. For those of you who have joined just recently, what I'm going to be doing today is explaining the third of the Four Noble Truths. If you want to know more about the first and the second Noble Truths, you can see my previous live streamings, which are on the Kachara Facebook page. So coming back to the third Noble Truth. Now, before I get into it, I want to backtrack a little bit and talk more about the second Noble Truth. In my previous session, I was actually talking about attachment. Actually, I was giving a little bit of a commentary more, or actually explaining a little bit more about what Pastor David was talking about in his previous session, which was the psychology of boredom, especially during our time now when we do have COVID-19 going around, and in a lot of countries, especially in Malaysia, we are under the under lockdown, under the movement control order. So in these situations, we're actually indoors. And when we're indoors, we're not used to doing things that we're attached to. And this causes us suffering, okay? This causes us actually, it is not really physical suffering, because when we're indoors, we're not actually suffering physically. What it does cause us is mental and emotional suffering. And what Pastor David went on to explain is this is because we have quite a few attachments. And attachments, as Pastor David explained, is actually based on the over-exaggeration of something's good qualities. Okay? Hi, Wei Ting and Pastor Gimli, thanks for joining. Good to see you here. So as Pastor David was explaining, when you over-exaggerate the good qualities of something, you actually become attached to it. And then when you don't, how shall I explain it? I'll give an example, okay? All right. Now, if I give an example, I'm going to give an example relevant to us. At the moment, we're stuck indoors all day, and a lot of us actually have an attachment to actually going out, being out of the house, and not just at work, but being out of the house, doing something on a social basis, on a recreational basis. So I'm going to take the example of going out and eating with friends, okay? Everybody knows in Malaysia there's a lot of really good places to eat, and we all love going there and exploring new places to eat, especially when we're with our friends. So now that we are in the movement control order, we're no longer actually being able to do that. Now, this is an actual attachment for some people, because in their minds, when they do go out with their friends and go out to really nice restaurants and do spend time with their friends and eat really good food, it's an attachment. It's attachment because they've actually over-exaggerated the good qualities in the action and actually going out and enjoying good food. Now, it's not to say that actually going out is a bad thing. It is just an action, but it's how you think about the action that actually leads to an increase or a generation of attachment towards it. Okay? So similarly, we're all in a situation at the moment where some of our attachments are not being fulfilled because we're confined in a physical location, for example, our homes, our apartments, wherever we are at the moment. So this causes suffering, and this is more of an emotional and a mental suffering. Okay, so this is something that I would like you, that I did ask in previous sessions, to keep in mind and to actually contemplate as we're going through this period, because this is something that the Buddha told us to do. When you've actually contemplated that and understood how it works and how your mind actually works, you can actually move on to the next two steps, which is the last of the Four Noble Truths. Okay? So I just wanted to share some methods with you about how to actually understand the suffering that you're going through. And one of the key ways in doing that is actually studying. Okay? Now everybody's going to say, oh, I don't want to study, I just want to do it. I don't really want to read books, I don't want to really do anything, I just want to, just tell me how to do it, okay? Now, but the thing is that all of us have our minds are very different. We all have different things, we're all attached to different things. But if you actually read and you study the teachings on how the mind works, you can actually apply it to your specific situation. Another thing that actually also helps is meditation. And one of the basic meditations that you can do, yet one of the most effective, is actually breathing meditation. Now, we do have JP Tong, who is actually doing meditation every morning in Kachara Forest Retreat. And you can join him because he's also live streaming his meditation sessions. So you can actually join him while he's actually doing that and experience for yourself what breathing meditation is all about every morning on the Kachara Forest Retreat Facebook page. Now, the way that breathing meditation actually helps is you basically develop a calmer mind and you're actually able to focus better. So what this does, in essence, is to calm the mind down of various emotional states that you might be going through and think about things in a more logical perspective. Now, this is something that I'm going to actually get into a bit later on in a couple of minutes, as I actually talk about the third of the Noble Truths in more detail. So the third Noble Truth actually is that there is a cessation of suffering. What does that actually mean? That means that all suffering can end, okay? And it means that the suffering does end, okay? So when the Buddha taught this particular noble truth, what he was describing was actually the state of enlightenment. Okay? He was telling people that the state of enlightenment, of an enlightened mind, is free from all sorts of suffering. You will have no suffering whatsoever. And the reason behind this is when you have reached enlightenment, on a grosser level, is you no longer are bound by the law of karma. Now, if you remember back to what we were talking about regarding the second noble truth, all suffering is based on karma, okay, on karmic results. But on a deeper level, what the state of enlightenment is it's a state where you no longer have what are known as the three poisons. So you no longer have the three things that I was talking about, which is ignorance, attachment, and hatred. These three things do not exist when you reach the stage of enlightenment. Okay? So that is, in essence, the third noble truth, is that when you reach that stage of enlightenment, you are no longer bound by your karma and you are no longer bound by ignorance, attachment, and hatred. Okay? When you are no longer bound by these two things, there is no more suffering. You have no suffering whatsoever, whether that be mental, whether that be emotional, whether that be physical. The suffering is completely gone. Okay? So logically speaking, the Buddha would have taught methods to reach that stage, because he's telling you if you get there, then all of your suffering is completely gone. Okay? So, In essence, what the Buddha was trying to tell us is that any of the Buddhist teachings that you follow, that you use, whether it be meditation, whether it be prayer, whether it be chanting mantras, whether it be studying, all leads eventually to that state. And talking about karma and talking about ignorance, hatred, and attachment, these three things are actually what we need to get rid of. Okay? And the majority of Buddhist teachings, in fact all of them, actually teach you how to do that. Okay? So this is something that I'm going to actually delve into deeper. I'm going to delve into the mechanics, as it were, of how this works in my next session, which will cover the fourth noble truth. Okay? I've actually seen some more people come online, so hello, thank you for joining. So just to recap, we're talking about the Four Noble Truths. This is the third session that I'm covering, so I'm covering the third noble truth, which is how to, which is the cessation of suffering, which means that all suffering stops. And this suffering stops because you reach the stage of enlightenment. Okay? And how to get there is actually to get rid of your attachment, your hatred, and your ignorance. So before we actually go any further, I actually want to just read out a couple of quotes that His Eminence Tenma Rinpoche said, which I think at this particular point, where in the explanation of the Four Noble Truths, is very, very important for us to understand. So Rinpoche said, the only way to get out of this suffering, which we've been talking about a lot in detail within the past two sessions, is a wholesome, undivided, and sincere effort to root out the delusions of ignorance, hatred, and attachment. All suffering can be destroyed by rooting out its causes. Okay? So here again, everything that I've been explaining today, and also everything that I've been explaining in the previous sessions, actually comes from the Buddha, but it was passed down through the centuries and came to His Eminence Tenma Rinpoche. Now, if you actually look in any of Tenma Rinpoche's teachings, you can actually figure out which of the Four Noble Truths Rinpoche is referring to. All of his teachings can be classified under one of the Four Noble Truths, okay? As with any Buddhist teaching. So Rinpoche went on to say, the way to separate yourself from these delusions and this state of mind is to start what? Thinking, contemplating, meditating, and analyzing the faults and unhappiness that they have brought you already with a logical mind. Okay? So this actually speaks to what actually we need to do. There's definitely benefit in understanding what the Four Noble Truths are from a logical perspective, which is what I've actually been explaining to all of you here who've been joining us. But the actual point in which the Four Noble Truths turn into a key that actually can transform your own life to become better is when you start to actually contemplate on the Four Noble Truths and when you start meditating on the Four Noble Truths. Then you can actually turn each and every one of your actions into something that's beneficial. Okay? So this is one of the reasons why I kept harping on about suffering in the first two sessions. It's kind of to drill it into you to realize that you're suffering. But how you actually do realize it is you have to analyze your own situation, your own life. So one of the things that Rinpoche had actually shared with me in the past was that at the end of every day, to actually analyze the actions that I have taken. I mean, you can even start doing this as well. So at the end of every day, you analyze the actions that you have taken. And you analyze also things that have happened to you. Okay? And then you try to understand how exactly did that affect you? How did that affect you emotionally? Did did that particular experience give you a good state of mind, or did it give you a negative state of mind? What kind of emotions actually went through your head when you were in that situation? And when you start doing that, you actually start having a grapple on the first two noble truths. This is the actual way to understand and live by the first two noble truths. And this is exactly what contemplation meditation is. But most people actually think that when you do this, you have to be in, sitting down, cross-legged, and in full meditation. And yes, there are practices that when you do that full contemplation meditation. But contemplation itself doesn't have to be in that situation. Any situation that you go through in life, you can actually stop yourself from reacting emotionally to it and actually contemplate on what's happening and then make a better decision from a more logical mind. Okay?
A question.
Oh, we have a question.
I'm not. 2 questions.
Okay, 1 minute. We have a couple of questions. Okay, first question. Okay.
Easy.
Yep. So Martin asks, is the cessation of suffering possible before one attains complete enlightenment? And he also asks, how can we reduce or cope with suffering in the interim period, i.e. before we become an enlightened? So Martin has 2 very important questions, so I'm going to answer them one by one. So the first, is cessation of suffering possible before one attains complete enlightenment? So Martin is basically asking, can we stop suffering before we're enlightened? Now, there are actually many levels to suffering. So the most gross form of suffering would obviously be physical, and then you get into mental and psychological suffering that we all go through. Now, on the most subtlest level, the answer is basically no. Okay, the most subtlest level, which means rooting out what Rinpoche has asked us to root out, which is the ignorance, your attachment, and your hatred. Okay, these 3 things are actually built up over many, many, many lifetimes, and it is so ingrained within our mind stream that it actually takes work and takes effort to get rid of. That can only be completely gotten rid of when you do achieve enlightenment. However, doing that is not it's not an immediate experience. You don't get rid of everything. You don't get rid of your negative karma. You don't get rid of all of these 3 delusions and then instantly become enlightened. It's a step-by-step process. It's a gradual process. And actually, that brings me to the 3rd quote, which I actually wanted to share with you, which was from Rinpoche, which was actually, Rinpoche actually says, take 1 step at a time. Work on 1 delusion at a time. It is an inner war, an inner battle. But it is a battle worth fighting because it will bring you peace of mind. Okay? Now, even though as I was explaining, it's a step-by-step process to actually get there, to actually rid yourself of all suffering. But as you progress step by step, you actually do get rid of your suffering in increments, in small bits and pieces. Now, a lot of us, when we think about suffering, we're actually thinking about one specific instance or one specific situation in life or a group of experiences. We're not actually thinking about suffering in its entirety. So not what the Buddha was trying to explain is that suffering in its entirety can only be gotten rid of or stopped once you reach enlightenment. But on a day-to-day basis, when we're dealing with things, we're dealing with one situation at a time. We're dealing with one emotional turmoil at a time. Now, the Buddha definitely did say that when you deal with these, you actually reduce your suffering step by step. So in any situation that you're going through in life, you can actually solve your suffering, you can actually stop it. And the way to do that, again, is to contemplate the situation, to analyze it from a logical point of view, and then make a decision from it based on logic rather than emotion. I got asked a question yesterday. It was actually on the blog. It was on the Ask the Pastors section, which was, what does it mean by letting go? Okay, what does it mean to let go? And this is something that I want to bring up here because it's linked, and also because it's quite poignant. I mean, it's quite important for what everybody here is going through at the moment. What does it mean by letting go? So I'm going to give an example. You're in your house with your brother or your sister or your spouse or your parents, and you're stuck with them all day. They might be a little bit irritated because they're also in the same situation as you are. And then all of a sudden you ask them something, or you're speaking with them, and they say something which you take in a negative way. But you don't, they might not have even meant it in a negative way. It's just that maybe they were just feeling a little bit irritated. So their intonation of the voice that they used, maybe the word that they used, hits a nerve with you. Then you have an emotional reaction to it, okay? But maybe you don't say anything, or you don't do anything in that instance. But what you do is you're holding on to that emotional reaction. And when you hold on to emotional reactions, what happens is these emotions actually grow within your mind, okay? So you were irritated, maybe you were angry, maybe you were upset at that particular point in time. But over the next couple of days, that irritation, that anger, it keeps growing and growing and growing until a couple of days later, because we're all in this confined space during lockdown, and we have to see this person every single day. It just keeps growing and growing and growing until a couple of days later, they say something or do something which might not even be negative. It's just you just don't like what they did or what they said. You burst out at them, and you're angry at them, and you scold them, and you scream at them, or what. You basically get into a fight with them. In this whole example that I've been given, what you have been doing is you've been holding on to that emotional experience that you had originally. Now, what is letting go all about? Letting go basically means when you have an experience that you find negative and you have that emotional reaction to it, you don't hold on to that negative emotion. Okay? You understand that you had a negative emotion, a negative emotional experience. Okay? You understand it. You accept the fact. Okay? But instead of letting that emotional experience overtake your mind and keep growing and growing day by day until it leads to something even more negative, which is maybe having a fight with your spouse, your husband, your partner, whoever, you're actually able to let it go. Okay? That's actually what it means by letting go of something. All right? So this is actually something that is quite important for us to understand, especially now, especially in situations where we're in close proximity all the time with a couple of individuals, be that our family that we're living with, maybe we're even living with friends, okay? So this is something that we need to understand will happen, and you need to understand the methods in which to stop that from happening. So that is how you solve suffering. You experience the cessation of getting rid of your suffering step by step. It is a gradual process, and it has to be worked on gradually. Okay? Coming to the second question, how can we reduce or cope with suffering in the interim period before we become enlightened? So this is exactly what I've just been explaining. It is to do it step by step. And the way in which you go about doing it is actually you practice the Dharma, you practice what the Buddha taught. So you practice understanding how your mind works, okay? I'm not going to get too much into it today, but it's something that I will continue on with in the next session, which will be session 4, which is on the path to enlightenment. Okay? I think we have a couple of more questions. Hello, Sharon. Hello, Sukfan. Who else do we have online? Hello, Pastor Hani and Cynthia Benkui. Rinli, thank you for joining. So those of you who have literally just joined us, I'm going over the third of the fourth Noble Truths. Okay? Okay, Martin has given another comment. Okay, so Martin's understanding from the answer is subtle suffering, which is a form of subtle karma, can only be can only be achieved or stopped upon enlightenment. But can gross suffering from gross karma be reduced, transmuted into something positive? Because I see people such as monks who presumably are still on the way to enlightenment appearing not to suffer. Is this correct? How can we reduce gross suffering, i.e. the suffering from the loss of a loved one? Now, okay, so I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. Martin's question is that there are multiple forms of suffering and that we go through them at different periods of our lives. Okay, so what Martin is talking about is what is known as the gross suffering. So actually the literal emotional turmoil or the physical turmoil that we go through when we're suffering. So Martin has asked, can we turn that suffering into something positive? Okay, and the answer is yes. Okay, we can. Any situation we actually go through in life, okay, it ties in back with what I was saying about letting go and that holding on to that emotion. Any situation we go in life, whether it's positive or negative, is actually or can be transformational for you. It's how you actually deal with it. Okay? It's how you think about it, how you contemplate it, and how you act after that situation. For example, Martin has gave an example of the loss of a loved one. Okay, so when we actually lose a loved one, most of us actually we're caught up in the emotion. We're caught up in the emotion, and what happens is we don't let go of that emotion. So that emotion that just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. So we basically go into various stages of grief. We miss the person, which is logical, obviously, but a lot of people allow that grief to kind of overcome their logical mind. Okay? Now, when you lose a loved one, obviously there is a great sense of loss and there is a great sense of grief. Okay? But how do you use that grief? How do you use that sadness? Do you use it to become a better person? Or do you use it to stay how you are? Or do you use it as an excuse to act negatively around people? Okay, some people when they're in grief, that they lash out at other people. Other people, when they're in grief, they take the life example of the person who has passed away, or their love or their feelings or their positive emotions towards that person, or what that person has actually done with their life, and actually use it as an example of how they can transform themselves. So, for example, if a loved one has passed away and they were extremely kind, they were compassionate people, do you think about what they did and how they helped other people? And do you use that as an example to be a kinder, better person yourself? Or do you just kind of keep it in the back of your mind and then forget it? If you actually keep it in the back of your mind and then forget it, and then just occasionally reminisce about this person, then obviously you haven't used your time with them, you haven't used your experience of knowing that person to actually benefit yourself or actually help other people. So any situation from a day-to-day point of view can be used to help you transform your mind. It can be used to help you reduce your own suffering, and it can also be used for you to help others reduce their suffering as well. That's from the day-to-day aspect of it. Now, if you're coming at it from a more dharmic aspect, for example, if you lost a loved one, you do everything that I've just spoken about finding inspiration in their life, but you also use it to actually contemplate suffering. Now, this person was born, this person grew up, they grew old, hopefully, and they passed away. Okay? This is life. This is something that we all need to go through. And if you're going through life and you don't think about this when you're actually going through anything and you experiencing anything in your interactions with other people, then you're not really practicing what the Buddha taught. Okay? Why? Because when you contemplate on these things, you're actually able to let go of these emotions easier. Okay? Contemplation of death, I know it sounds morbid, it is actually one of the most fundamental practices within Buddhism. And it sounds morbid to everyone. Nobody wants to contemplate it. Nobody wants to think about it happening. Nobody wants to deal with it. I mean, it's emotionally traumatic as it is when it happens to you, when somebody you love dies. But it's the perfect opportunity for you to actually use that experience and transform it, and actually to make something beneficial out of it. Because if you think about impermanence, whether it is death or whether things, just general impermanence, you're resolved to actually become a better person and actually make an impact in your life and make an impact in other people's life, to become a more compassionate person, to become a wiser person, to become a more kinder person. It gets stronger. And everything negative that usually goes through your mind when you contemplate this, when you contemplate death and impermanence, you're actually able to let it go. Because what's the point? What is the point of holding on to, the one word that somebody deep down that you love said that you took the wrong way, but you kept holding on to it? What is the point? Eventually things are going to end. And when you realize things are going to end, what's more important? The person you actually care about, or the one word that they spoke to you, or the tone in which they spoke to you that you took the wrong way? This thing completely falls by the wayside. And you start to find yourself actually becoming a better person. Because you're able to let go of all this emotional baggage that you've been clinging on to, that you've been hanging on to for years and years, or maybe just even a couple of days. No matter how long it is, when you contemplate it, you're actually able to move on. Okay, sorry, I went into a bit of a rant. Okay, all right. But this is what the Buddha was talking about. This is the transformational aspect of the Four Noble Truths, and how you change your whole life. You change your life, you change your experiences with others, you change your interaction with other people. Everything literally changes. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's a process. So you need to work on it gradually. Okay? All right. Now, getting back to what I actually wanted to discuss with you, which was, last couple of sessions I've been talking about the three poisons, okay? The three things that cause us to create negative karma. These three things are what lead us to suffer. Now, these are ignorance, attachment, and hatred. Now, today, what I wanted to talk to you about is the direct antidote, or the direct counter to these three things. And within Buddhism, these are known as the three principal aspects of the path. Okay? Now, they're actually known as renunciation, bodhicitta, and wisdom. Now, these are kind of concepts that I don't actually want to get into today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present these three concepts in an easier to understand method. And when you implement these three things in your life, you actually start cutting the roots of these of the three poisons, and you actually start to alleviate your own suffering. Okay? So these three things, in essence, is wisdom, generosity, and compassion. Okay, so the first one I'm going to start with is wisdom. Now, usually within Buddhism, it's called renunciation, but I'm going to turn it wisdom. Okay? And why I'm going to term it wisdom instead of renunciation is because renunciation has many connotations to it. And usually when people think about renunciation, they don't want to do it. But when you think of something as wisdom, it's something that everybody wants in some form or another. Now, what wisdom is all about, wisdom is about learning. It's about contemplation. So usually when we talk about wisdom, we say, yes, you have to read your Dharma books. Yes, you have to study. Yes, you have to understand how things work. But a part of wisdom is also contemplation. Okay? So as I was talking about earlier, when you're in a situation where you hold on to some emotional reaction and you don't actually let it go, just understanding that is actually a part of wisdom. Okay? Contemplating on how that actually relates to your life right now, that is wisdom. Okay? Understanding the way out of it and to stop yourself from suffering again, that is wisdom. Okay? So in essence, that is a very, very basic form of what in Buddhism we term renunciation. Okay? So how do you apply that today? Okay? All right. So I want everyone who's watching now to think of an example of something that happened which caused an emotional reaction in you. And an emotional reaction that maybe you up until this point haven't been able to get rid of. But I want you to make it even more specific. Okay, I want you to think of something, an emotional reaction that you've actually had during the movement control order. So while we've all been in lockdown, while we've all been indoors, I want you to think of an example, and you're all going to have one. Everyone is going to have one, okay? And if you think you don't have one, you're kidding yourself, okay? Because definitely you would have had a very, very strong emotional reaction towards somebody, okay? If you are comfortable with it, you can share it. If you're not, no worries. I want you to keep that example in your mind. As you keep that example in your mind, I want you to think about how you reacted following that experience. Okay? Did you lash out instantly? Or did you keep thinking about it? Did somebody say something to irritate you to no end, and then you keep replaying that in your mind again and again and again and again and again? Okay? This is what the Buddha meant by wisdom. Because wisdom is not just about learning something. Wisdom is also about implementing it. Okay? It's about the contemplation of it. Okay? So I've told you, just today, for example, I've been sharing you what Rinpoche taught with me about examples of how we all suffer and we don't actually let go of something. Now, think about that situation. Think about what caused that situation, that emotional experience in your mind. Maybe someone said or someone did something that you thought was negative, or that irritated you, or that went against your principles. And it really got you. Okay? How do you react to it? Do you let it overtake your mind? Do you fixate on it? Or do you actually let it go? Okay? Did you let that experience guide you in making another action or saying something back? And if it did, what was the end result of that? Was it a good experience? Was it a good result? Or was it a bad result? Okay? So what we're doing now, what hopefully everyone here is doing, is taking a situation and analyzing it. This is a technique that Sam Rinpoche actually shared with me to do at the end of every day. Now, when you do this at the end of every day, you actually begin to be able to understand how your mind works. Okay? When you do this continuously over time, you will notice that when you get into these situations where you do have that strong emotional reaction to something that's happening, you're able to let it go. When you're able to let it go, you're actually able to come at this situation with a more logical mind. And when you do something, when you take actions from a more logical mind, rather than a mind that's overtaken by emotion, the results of any action you take are going to be much, much better. Okay? So the second thing that you can do. Okay? So that was the wisdom side of it. The second is generosity. Okay? Now, in this time when we're in an enclosed space with, a lot of, maybe our family, or maybe we live with our friends, but we're in this enclosed space and things are going to happen. You're going to have emotional reactions to each other. Okay? One of the antidotes to this is actually to be generous. Okay? So be generous with your kids, be generous with your partners or your spouses or your parents or whoever that you're living with at the moment. Now, when I talk about be generous with them, I am not talking about give them food, give them what they want. If they want literal things. Okay? It's not just about giving things. It's not just about giving physical things. Generosity is actually also about giving your time. Actually spending time with your family, with the people that you're living with. Generosity is about understanding them. Okay? It's about helping them. Maybe they are going through some difficult time and you probably might not even have realized it. And if you haven't realized it, we're all in this movement control order together. So no matter how you're feeling, the person next to you, sitting next to you, is gonna, or living with you, is gonna be feeling almost exactly the same way. So here you practice generosity. Okay? Generosity is giving your time and giving your effort to the people around you. Okay? Usually we talk about, when we talk in Buddhism about being generous, you're talking about maybe, going out and feeding the homeless, or maybe doing pujas for people who are ill. But true generosity is actually the generosity that we actually give to the people closest to us. So I think this is something that we should keep in mind and we should do, especially during this time, because this time is the best time that you've actually got. It comes back to what Martin was saying earlier. You can use something negative and change it to be something positive. Okay? So I'm hoping that what I've told you so far, you actually contemplate it and you actually change the way in which you're interacting with the actual people that you're in the lockdown with. Okay? And the third is compassion. Now, compassion is more than just, being nice to a person. Compassion actually is thinking about putting yourself in their shoes. How do they feel? Okay? Perhaps you have reacted or you have said something in a negative way and you knew it was negative and you didn't care about how the other person was feeling. When you put yourself in their shoes and understand how they might have felt, this is one way, just one simple way of developing compassion. When you start doing this more and more and more, you actually start realizing that you've actually got a lot to give. You've actually been holding yourself back in the way that you can actually benefit people, in the way that people can actually find relief from suffering through what you do and what you say. You see, developing compassion also has a very strong impact on yourself, your personal transformation. You actually realize you're actually capable of doing a lot more for people than you originally thought. And this is something that is remarkably transformational, especially about the Buddha's teachings. Now, I know when we're studying Buddhism and when we're going through all the teachings, we think about the teachings in one way. And usually that way isn't the real way we're supposed to be thinking about it. We're supposed to be thinking about the teachings and everything we do according to the Dharma, whether it be meditation, whether it be studying, whether it be contemplation, if it be doing pujas, if it's doing your mantras, if it's doing your daily sadhana, whatever it may be, it is a tool for self-transformation. And if you're not using it for self-transformation, you're actually not using it to the best of your ability. This is what the Buddha was trying to teach you. Okay? Okay, I think we have... Okay, we've got a comment from Mr. Lum. I have found more peace during MCO, Movement Control Order. This is because of the time I can do more contemplation and listen to Dharma sharing. Perfect. Absolutely incredible if you ask me. A lot of people are not making the best use of their time under the movement control order, and since we are in this position, you need to make the most of it. Now, if you're practicing Buddhism, this is the perfect thing to do, is actually to listen to and contemplate the teachings and actually to put them into practice. So when this movement control order is finally over, because everything ends, okay, when we go back to daily life, we've actually got this entire new skill set in which that we can deal with life, deal with the problems that come up, handle emotional situations that you get into, and actually become a better person. So this is the perfect time to do all of this. Okay. All right. I've been talking for quite a while. So what I want to talk with you in conclusion is actually some of what to do, okay? Especially in our situation now. Now, I've talked about the Three Noble Truths so far, and we've discussed and how we should get over our suffering in various ways. Now, so I just wanted to share with you some tips. So these tips are going to sound extremely secular, okay? But if you keep in mind everything that I've just told you, okay, in this session and the two previous sessions, you actually realize that there's a lot of Dharma behind it. Okay? So the first one is, in this time, you're going to have run-ins with the people you're living in. And it's perfectly okay at our stage in practice to feel sad, to feel angry, to feel depressed, to feel stressed, to feel confused. It's perfectly okay. But according to the Dharma, what you need to do when you feel that is not to let it overtake you. Just accept the fact that you're having these feelings and analyze why you're having these feelings. Once you analyze that, you transform these negative situations, these negative emotions that you're going through, into Dharma. Okay? Right. The second is going to sound very, very secular. Maintain a healthy lifestyle, okay? Please make sure everybody gets enough exercise and make sure you have a good enough diet, okay? Now, I'm sure you've all heard that, but I'm telling you from a Buddhist perspective because we actually need to appreciate that we're actually in human form and we have the ability and the capabilities to actually do all of this contemplation and actually transform our lives, okay? The other thing is, be kind to yourself and be kind to the people that you're living with, okay? This actually will cover both wisdom and, what did I say? Generosity and compassion. So I talked about three things, okay? Wisdom, generosity, and compassion. So the first one, about understanding your feelings, actually has to do with wisdom, okay? Especially if something happens, if someone irritates you because, I don't know, they left the tap on and they didn't turn it off. It annoys some people, so, you know, that's wisdom. Understanding how that affects your mind is wisdom. The second is be kind to yourself and be kind to others. So this is generosity and this is compassion. And the third one is, now that you actually do have the time, I would suggest that you actually structure your day, okay, from a dharmic point of view. Structure your day. Maybe start the day off if you wake up early. Join JP in his breathing meditation in the morning on the Kachara Forest Retreat Facebook page. Wake up, join JP's meditation and experience what breathing meditation is all about. Then later on in the day, make a little time to read. Make a little time to read the Dharma. And then also make time to engage in practice, whether it's you want to do a puja. Maybe you even want to do a retreat since you've got time to do it. Or maybe you just want to do your daily sadhana. Make time to do it. Okay? And the third one is, make sure you always tune in at 9 p.m. on the Kachara Facebook page to watch either myself or Pastor David sharing more Dharma with you, okay? And the fourth is make time for the people around you. Make time for the people around you that you are with. Show them kindness and show them generosity. This is actually part of how you can transform your life. Okay? All right. So thank you everyone for joining. I've gone quite over what I usually do, but I hope you have enjoyed or learned something from this session today. Comment from JP Tong is that the daily meditation is on at 8:30 a.m. every morning on the Kachara Forest Retreat Facebook page. Okay, so I hope people have learned something or learned something new that they might not have known about Buddhism, and especially the Four Noble Truths throughout this session. So please do join me again. I will be back on Monday night at 9 p.m. for the final session of the Four Noble Truths, which I'm going to get more into what the Buddha taught about gaining enlightenment, and which is the path that we need to take to rid ourselves of all suffering as well. And tomorrow night, Pastor David will be on at 9 p.m. Here again on the Kachara Facebook page. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you for listening to Easy Dharma for Difficult Times. Good night.